Lena Carter and Ethan Cole looked like the perfect couple, until a secret affair with his worst enemy, Ryan Hale, set off a chain of betrayal, fake death, and revenge so twisted it left only blood and silence behind. Lena Carter lived a life that, from the outside, seemed nearly perfect. She had a stable job as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, a beautiful home in the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, and a fiancé, Ethan Cole, who everyone described as charming and devoted. Their engagement photos hung on the walls, capturing smiles that looked genuine enough to convince anyone that they were happy. But Lena knew that the smiles were fading long before the pictures were ever taken. Ethan had once been gentle, funny, and patient, but something inside him had changed. He had grown distant, jealous, and overly controlling, questioning her about her friends, her long shifts, even her tone of voice when she spoke to strangers. At first, Lena dismissed his behavior as love, just a man afraid of losing what mattered to him. But slowly, that love became suffocating. Every small disagreement turned into hours of silent tension. Ethan's compliments became rare, replaced by subtle criticisms that made her doubt herself. Lena's confidence began to erode until she felt more like a prisoner than a partner. Still, she stayed. She told herself that all relationships had rough patches, that Ethan would soften again if she just tried harder. But as the months passed, she started to feel the weight of pretending. She'd sit by the window after long shifts, staring at the quiet streets outside, wondering if life was meant to feel this hollow. Her friends noticed the change in her voice, the forced laughter, the constant excuses for why she couldn't meet them anymore. Something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't love, it was control disguised as care. And though she couldn't admit it yet, Lena was already searching for an escape she didn't know she was about to find. It happened on a quiet night after another argument that left Lena feeling empty. She sat on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through her old photos, trying to remind herself of who she used to be. That was when she saw him, Ryan Hale. His face brought back a rush of memories from her college days, years filled with laughter, freedom, and the kind of affection that had once felt effortless. Ryan had been her first real love, the one who made her believe in happy endings before life taught her how fragile they were. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, not since his falling out with Ethan, who had once been his closest friend. Curiosity overcame hesitation. With a trembling hand, Lena typed a short message, just a simple hello, and hit send. She didn't expect him to reply, but minutes later, her phone buzzed. That single response opened a door she hadn't realized she'd been standing in front of for years. Their conversation started innocently, reminiscing about old memories, mutual friends, and the carefree days of youth. But soon, their messages grew longer, more personal, more dangerous. Ryan confessed that he had never fully forgiven Ethan for what happened between them, a betrayal that cost him his business and his peace. Lena found herself listening to his anger, his pain, his loneliness, and for the first time in months, she felt understood. It was intoxicating, the way he seemed to see her without judgment. Every message felt like a secret she couldn't stop keeping. Nights turned into mornings as they shared pieces of their lives they hadn't spoken about in years. What began as a spark of nostalgia quietly grew into something deeper, something forbidden, and Lena didn't see how close she was to crossing a line she could never return from. The rain was coming down hard that night, when Lena finally agreed to see Ryan in person. She told Ethan she had an overnight shift at the hospital, but her heart pounded with guilt as she drove toward the downtown hotel where Ryan was waiting. She almost turned back twice, but curiosity and longing pushed her forward. When she walked into the dimly lit bar, her breath caught. Ryan looked different, older, stronger, more confident, but his eyes still held the same warmth that used to make her feel safe. One smile from him, and all the walls she had built over the years began to crumble. They talked for hours, as if time had folded in on itself. Ryan spoke about rebuilding his life after losing everything, about the anger that still simmered when he thought of Ethan. Lena listened, drawn to the way his voice carried both bitterness and calm. She didn't realize how much she had missed feeling seen until that moment. What began as conversation soon turned into a connection neither of them could control. One drink led to another, one touch to the next, and before the night was over, the distance between them disappeared completely. From that night on, their meetings became frequent but carefully hidden. Hotel rooms, quiet cafes, parking lots at midnight. They lived in fragments of time stolen from the lives they were supposed to be living. For Lena, it felt like breathing after years of suffocation. For Ryan, it was revenge mixed with desire. Both knew it couldn't last, but they kept going, telling themselves it was love, not destruction. Every lie Lena told Ethan grew easier, every secret kiss more addictive. She didn't realize that love had already turned into the weapon that would soon destroy them all. Ethan Cole had always been an observant man. He noticed details others missed, an unfamiliar perfume, a change in tone, a faint smile that lingered too long after a text. At first, he told himself he was overthinking it, that Lena was just tired or stressed from work. But the unease inside him kept growing. The late-night shifts that didn't match her schedule, the sudden need to keep her phone close, the way she avoided his eyes when he asked simple questions, all of it started to add up. One evening, while she showered, his curiosity overcame his restraint. He unlocked her phone using the password he had memorized long ago, and what he saw shattered him. Messages, dozens of them. Words filled with warmth, longing, and a name he never wanted to see again. Ryan Hale. The man who had once been his best friend. The man who had betrayed him in business, now betraying him again in love. Ethan felt the world collapse around him as he scrolled through the messages, seeing the truth of every lie Lena had told. The shock quickly turned to fury. He wanted to confront her, scream, demand answers, but instead, something darker took root. He became quiet, almost eerily calm. He smiled when she spoke, kissed her goodnight, and went to work as if nothing had changed. But every night, when she slept beside him, Ethan stayed awake, staring into the dark, imagining ways to make them both pay. He started following her car, checking her call logs, memorizing her routines. The betrayal burned so deep it numbed him. He no longer wanted to save his relationship. He wanted to destroy it. In his mind, both Lena and Ryan had taken everything from him. Now, he would take everything from them. Ryan Hale woke to the sound of his doorbell early one morning, the sky still gray with dawn. On his porch sat a plain brown envelope with no return address. Inside were printed screenshots of his messages with Lena, each one carefully chosen to expose every secret they had shared. At the bottom was a small handwritten note that chilled him to his core. "She'll destroy you like she destroyed me." There was no signature, but Ryan didn't need one. He knew it was Ethan. The words felt like a warning, but also a challenge, a message that the game had just begun. Ryan's first instinct was anger, followed by fear. He had built his life back from ruin once before, and he wasn't ready to lose everything again because of an affair. He called Lena and told her they needed to stop seeing each other, that things were going too far. But Lena refused to listen. Her voice trembled with emotion as she told him she couldn't go back to the life she had before. She was tired of pretending, tired of being controlled. She didn't realize that by clinging to him, she was only tightening the trap Ethan had set. Meanwhile, Ethan's presence grew like a shadow over both their lives. Lena began noticing strange things, a car parked across the street for hours, the feeling of being watched even inside her home. Ryan brushed it off, convincing himself Ethan was just trying to scare them. But the tension between guilt and obsession was wearing them both down. What none of them realized was that the lines between love and hatred had already blurred beyond repair. Ethan wasn't just watching anymore. He was planning, and every silent moment was another step closer to something neither of them could escape. The morning Ethan disappeared began like any other. His car keys were missing from the counter, and the faint sound of his shoes echoed as he left the house before sunrise. Lena assumed he was going to work early, though a strange unease lingered in her stomach. By evening, he still hadn't returned. Calls went unanswered, texts left undelivered. When night fell and his phone went dead, panic finally set in. She called the police, her voice shaking as she reported him missing. Within hours, officers found his car abandoned near a riverbank 20 miles away. The doors were unlocked, his wallet still inside, and the driver's seat soaked from the rain. To investigators, it looked like a suicide. News spread quickly. Friends and co-workers spoke of Ethan's recent mood swings, his quiet behavior, and the heartbreak of discovering his fiancée's betrayal. The story fit too perfectly. Reporters called it a tragedy born from love and loss. Lena gave an emotional interview, her eyes red, her voice fragile. She talked about guilt, regret, and the man she had once loved. People pitied her, sympathized with her pain, and believed her tears. But behind closed doors, Lena's emotions were far more complicated. For days, she could barely sleep, haunted by nightmares of Ethan standing at the river's edge. Yet, beneath the fear was something she dared not admit: relief. With Ethan gone, the weight of her lies felt lighter. She told herself the worst was finally over, that she and Ryan could begin again without shadows. They met secretly, whispering about a fresh start, convincing themselves that tragedy had set them free. Neither realized that the story was far from finished. Ethan's disappearance wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of something far more sinister. A month after Ethan's disappearance, Lena and Ryan decided to leave everything behind for a while. They rented a small wooden cabin deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, surrounded by thick trees and silence that felt almost healing. It was meant to be a new beginning, a chance to breathe after weeks of grief and guilt. The first day was perfect. They cooked together, laughed for the first time in months, and sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills. For the first time, Lena believed she might finally be free from the ghost of her past. But that peace began to fracture by the second night. It started with small things: a window that she swore she had closed suddenly wide open, the faint sound of footsteps outside when the world should have been still. Ryan brushed it off, blaming the creaks of the old cabin and the wind that howled through the forest. But Lena couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. When she looked out into the darkness, she thought she saw movement among the trees, a flicker of shadow that vanished as soon as she tried to focus. The following morning, she found muddy footprints near the back door, far too large to be hers or Ryan's. Her heart pounded as she tried to make sense of it. Ryan dismissed it again, telling her she was exhausted, paranoid, imagining things after everything that had happened. But Lena couldn't ignore the chill that crawled up her spine. The woods no longer felt peaceful. They felt alive, watching, waiting. What neither of them knew was that their escape had already been discovered. Someone had found them, and their perfect weekend had just turned into a countdown to terror. The morning after the footprints appeared, Ryan went outside to chop firewood, determined to calm Lena's nerves. The mist still clung to the ground, thick and gray, wrapping the trees in silence. From the window, Lena watched him work, his breath visible in the cold air. That was when she saw it: a shadow moving slowly between the trees, tall and deliberate, watching him. Her heart froze. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the faint sway of branches. When Ryan came back inside, she wanted to tell him, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't want to sound crazy, not after everything they'd been through. As evening fell, the tension in the cabin grew unbearable. The lights flickered, the old wood creaked with every gust of wind, and the forest outside felt closer somehow. When Ryan went to lock the front door, he paused. It was already open. Neither of them remembered unlocking it. He searched the cabin, flashlight in hand, but found nothing. Trying to stay calm, he chalked it up to his own forgetfulness. But Lena couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made her heart race: the crunch of snow, the snap of a twig, the faint hum of breathing that might have been the wind. Around midnight, Ryan stepped outside again, determined to prove there was no one there. He circled the cabin, saw nothing, and was about to return when his flashlight beam caught a piece of paper pinned to the wooden door. The words were scrawled in black ink, smudged by rain but still clear enough to read. "You thought I'd drown that easily?" Ryan felt the blood drain from his face as he turned toward the dark forest, realizing the impossible. Ethan was alive, and he was out there watching them. The moment Ryan read the note, the world seemed to tilt. He rushed inside, his hands trembling as he showed it to Lena. Her face went pale, her lips parting in disbelief. It couldn't be true. Ethan was dead, gone, buried in the river. But deep down, something inside her already knew. The strange noises, the footprints, the open door, none of it had been her imagination. Panic began to consume the cabin. Ryan insisted they leave immediately, but when they ran outside, the tires of their car were slashed, the metal edges still wet with rain. They were trapped. Lena's breathing grew shallow as she looked toward the dark forest surrounding them. Every tree seemed alive, whispering Ethan's name. Hours passed with no sign of him, just the sound of wind rattling the windows and the occasional thud against the cabin walls. Then, Near midnight, a faint orange glow appeared through the back window. Ryan rushed to the door and froze. The shed behind the cabin was burning. The flames rose high, lighting the forest in a hellish glow. And then they saw him. Through the smoke and fire, a figure emerged. His clothes were torn, his skin scarred, but the eyes were unmistakable. Ethan was alive. His face, half burned and twisted with fury, was more terrifying than death itself. He had faked everything: the car, the river, the disappearance. He had watched them rebuild their lives, waiting for the right moment to strike. As he stepped closer, his voice carried through the crackling fire, low and cold. The past he had drowned had come crawling back from the dark, and this time, he wasn't leaving without blood. The nightmare Lena thought she escaped had finally found her again. Ethan stormed toward the cabin, his shadow flickering against the walls as flames from the burning shed lit the night. Ryan grabbed a metal poker from the fireplace, his pulse racing. The air smelled of smoke and fear. When Ethan burst through the door, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the small cabin. His face was a terrifying mix of rage and madness, eyes wild, breathing heavy. Without a word, he swung the crowbar in his hand, shattering the edge of the table and sending shards of wood across the floor. Ryan lunged forward, striking him, but Ethan barely flinched. Years of anger had hardened him beyond pain. The two men crashed into the furniture, glass breaking, the cabin shaking from the force of their fight. Lena screamed, begging them to stop, but neither seemed to hear. Every punch, every shove carried years of betrayal and hatred. Ryan fought for survival, Ethan for revenge. Blood smeared the walls as the struggle grew desperate. Ryan managed to knock the crowbar from Ethan's hand, but his victory lasted only a second before Ethan slammed him into the counter. Lena's hands shook as she grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a kitchen knife. She shouted for them to stop, tears blinding her, but when Ethan turned toward her, Ryan lunged again. In the chaos, Lena's hand moved faster than thought. The blade met flesh. For a split second, silence filled the air. Ryan froze, his eyes wide with disbelief as blood spread across his shirt. He fell to the floor without a sound. Ethan stopped, his fury dissolving into horror. Lena dropped the knife, trembling, realizing she had killed the only person she thought could save her. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. When the police arrived the next morning, smoke still drifted from the charred remains of the shed. The cabin was in chaos: broken glass, overturned furniture, and a trail of blood that told a story too twisted to fully understand. Ryan's body lay on the wooden floor, lifeless, his eyes open as if still in shock. Ethan was found unconscious near the doorway, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Lena sat beside Ryan, motionless, staring at nothing. Her hands were stained with blood, her lips trembling but silent. The officers tried to speak to her, but she didn't respond. It was as if her mind had already left that place. In the days that followed, investigators pieced together what they could. Ethan was charged with attempted murder and arson after recovering in the hospital. His plan for revenge was undeniable. His fingerprints, the slashed tires, the letter, all led back to him. But Lena's story was harder to define. She confessed to stabbing Ryan, but claimed it was an accident, a moment of chaos she could never take back. The court saw her as both victim and culprit. She was charged with involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to several years in prison. The media devoured the story, calling it a love triangle drenched in betrayal. Reporters replayed her interview from months earlier, contrasting her tears of guilt for Ethan's death with her new image as the woman at the center of his vengeance. Some pitied her, others called her manipulative, cold, even dangerous. In her cell, Lena rarely spoke. Nights were filled with the sound of her own breathing and the haunting echo of Ryan's final gasp. She had lost both men, one to death, the other to hate, and she knew she would never truly escape either of them. Months passed in silence after the trial. Ethan adjusted to prison life with a cold acceptance, spending his days alone in the library and his nights replaying every moment that had led him there. He told himself Lena was gone forever, trapped in her own cage just as he was in his. But one afternoon, during mail call, a plain white envelope slid under his cell door. There was no return address, just his name written in delicate, familiar handwriting. His heart pounded as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Lena, standing in front of a coffee shop in another city, smiling faintly. Her hair was shorter, her clothes simple, her eyes calm in a way he had never seen before. On the back of the photo were 7 words written in black ink. "You can't kill what's already dead inside." Ethan stared at the picture for hours, disbelief slowly giving way to realization. Somehow, she had escaped. Rumors began to swirl among the inmates that Lena had been released early under a new identity, part of a rehabilitation program for trauma survivors. No one could confirm it, but the image in Ethan's hand was proof enough. He felt rage first, then something darker, admiration. She had survived everything he had thrown at her and walked away untouched by guilt. That night, Ethan burned the photograph in his cell sink, watching the edges curl and blacken. But the message stayed with him, echoing long after the ashes were gone. Somewhere out there, Lena was free, living as someone else, while he rotted in the very prison he had built for them both. The story wasn't over. It had simply changed hands. And this time, Lena was the one holding the final move.